see if that helps me with my throat, which seems to give out from time to time. Excuse me. All right, so today we are obviously continuing on with the things that we've been talking about for the last few months, perhaps forever, because we're saying the same general things over and over again. But today we are talking about gratitude as spiritual practice. This is the month of Thanksgiving, and you'll see a lot of memes on Facebook and things about Thanksgiving and things about gratitude and what they are. What I'm suggesting is it's most important for you to know what your definition of gratitude is, what your definition of Thanksgiving is. As we discussed briefly when Wendy gave us the opening quote, how we take that quote depends on what we think gratitude is. And so many times in life we use words as if we fully understood what they meant. And we use words in a manner that implies that everybody has the same definition. And of course that's not true. That's not true at all. And I think in learning to communicate with each other, we have to be willing to explore those definitions. So if you look at the animosity that we see in politics in our country right now, people are not taking the time to ask one another, well, what do you mean by that? What does that mean to you? Tell me more. Tell me more. Instead, somebody uses a hot button word, a trigger word, and the other side just immediately reacts because they assume that they assume that their definition of that word is what the other person meant, and it may not be at all. And we need to think about these things. As Dr. Holmes says, we need to think about what we're thinking about. Right? So if it's done unto us according to our belief, and we believe lots of different definitions of things, then it's going to be done unto us according to that belief, whether that definition is correct or not. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of using a word for years and then suddenly finding out that you weren't using it right. Perhaps when you were a child and you learned it, you picked it up from the context, whatever was going on when you first heard the word, and you thought it meant something entirely different than what it means. And this is why we explore from time to time. This is why we go back and ask ourselves, what does that mean? What does it mean to me? What are the other possible meanings of this word? But more importantly, how do I express that in my life? You know, it's one thing to say something, but it's another thing to actually live it, to actually express it in your life. So we may say, for example, that we are very grateful. We may say, for example, that we have a grateful heart. But if somebody came from the outside and was looking in and observing, what would they see in terms of your behavior? What would they see in terms of the way that you live your life? That they could say, well, that is their expression of gratitude. That is their expression of celebration, of joy. So we're going to go into these ideas a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit first why they're important, and then we're going to kind of go into, how do we live our lives in such a way that gratitude becomes our spiritual practice. And if it's already our spiritual practice, then how do we take it up a notch? How do we take it up a notch? So many years ago, one of my friends, we traveled a lot together on the road for the company we worked for, and we used to sit and have conversations about different books we read and things like that. And he mentioned a book to me. The title of the book is called A Stranger in a Strange Land. And I want to tell you, I tried to read the book and I found it to be a difficult read, but the concept of the book, as he explained it to me, was probably what interested me most. It's a stranger in a strange land. And it's a science fiction book. And the premise of the book is this. The United States sends the first mission to Mars, to colonize Mars. We're going to put people on Mars, and they're going to populate Mars. We send married couples up there, and they're going to build a shelter, and we're going to establish Mars as a human colony. But something goes awry. They're only there for a limited period of time, a year or so, and all of the people that were sent there die off for one reason or another. They get sick or whatever. They die off. And the people on Earth assume that there's no human beings left there. So 20 some odd years later, they send another spaceship to Mars to try to go and investigate what happened to this colony. And to their surprise, what they find is that one of the couples had a child, a young man, a boy who's now a young man in his 20s. And this child was raised by the Martians. The Martians, there are in this story, there are intelligent beings on Mars, and they raised this child. So he has been raised in a totally different culture, totally different way of looking at life, totally different way of thinking. Doesn't know all the things that we know here on Earth. And they bring him back to Earth. So he is the stranger in the strange land. He is a human being. He is here on planet Earth. But he doesn't belong. He doesn't feel like he belongs. All of the ways and all of the customs and all of the ideas and beliefs of the people are strange to him. He is a stranger in a strange land. Now, the author of the book was writing the book more as social commentary than science fiction. But writers do that. Sometimes if you place something in a setting, a fictional setting, an author is able to dive into some really deep topics in a manner that is not as offensive as if they tried to hit them straight on. So what the author was trying to do was trying to get people to look at society's ideas of racism, of sexism, of ownership, of all the different things that we assume, that all of the different things that exist in our society and perhaps we never question. You know, for example, one of the subplots of the book was, well, who owns Mars? Does this person own Mars because he was the first human being born on Mars? Well, then what about the Martians? They were there first. Don't they own Mars? And, you know, the humans were saying, no, it's ours, we own it. And then the author kind of drew a comparison back to Native Americans and Aboriginal people in different lands, and how the Europeans came and said, well, this is our land. Well, what about the people who live there? And that discussion's still going on today. I attended a video meet on Columbus Day where chiefs of the Native American tribes in this area were discussing their view of the Europeans coming to this land and their land and declaring it for the king or queen of wherever they came from. So at any rate, the point of the book was to cause us to go back and examine the things that we believe in our society that were so deeply embedded in our consciousness that we never question them. We never stop and think about them. And to me, the really interesting part, you know, for my interest in spiritual growth is this is what we do in meditation. See? In meditation, we become the observer. We become the witness. We become the questioner. We see these thoughts that go across our field of awareness, but we detach from them. See, we give ourselves that room to step back and look at them as a distant observer might look at them. Desmond Morris, in his book The Naked Ape, did kind of the same thing. He said if you were a zoologist from another galaxy and you came to planet Earth and you tried to to look at the different types of creatures, how would you categorize human beings? And he says you would look at human beings and you would say, well, they're a form of ape without hair. They're the naked ape. And then he went on to observe, but the differences between the human beings and the animal kingdom, the way that the apes live in the wild. So we need this time. We need this time deliberately. We need this time to ask ourselves, do I feel like a stranger? Do I feel like a stranger in my own land? Do I feel like a stranger in the kingdom of God? Do I really feel like I belong, or do I feel like I am an outsider? Like the young man who was born on Mars coming back trying to figure out, where do I fit in? What's going on here? How does this apply to me? So the spiritual journey then that we've been talking about is, how do we attune ourselves? How do we bring ourselves from this vantage point or viewpoint of separation? There is this thing called God, and it is perfect, it is whole, it is complete, it is all-knowing, it is all-powerful, it is all-presence. We use those words, but our behavior and our experience implies that we don't feel part of it. Dr. Holmes tells us this. All of the problems that we experience in life come from our beliefs in separation. When we first started reading Trine, and we first started talking about Frederick Bales, the perfection already is, the love already is, the health already is. But we have to find our connection to it. Trine gave us the example of opening the floodgate on the aqueduct to increase the amount of flow, or increase the flow of the divine perfection through us. And what he tells us is that the spiritual is already perfect, is already whole, is already complete, but the human experience appears less than that, because what we experience in our human conditions is this perfection filtered through our belief system, filtered through our thoughts. If we believe in struggle and strife, we experience struggle and strife. See? Our spiritual growth then, quite simply in that way of thinking, our spiritual growth is to find our way, each and every one of us, to find our way to identify with, to attune our thoughts with, right? To be in harmony with the perfection that is already there. And if we look at life, if we step back and look at life where human consciousness has not kind of changed the flow, we see a harmony. We see a natural order. We see a harmony. We see a wisdom. We see an intelligence. If we stop and look at just what's around us and how amazing it is, we can see how things work together in harmony. I mean, how the scientists will talk about the probability of all of these conditions that we find that are required to make life on Earth possible existing. That they give it a very low probability that it would happen. How magnificent is that? We are just close enough to the sun on our planet that it can warm the Earth and provide us with life, but not burn us up. The delicate balance there. Excuse me, I'm going to get a sip of tea here. We find an exchange, a synergy, a beneficial exchange in oxygen and carbon dioxide. We breathe in the oxygen. We give off the carbon dioxide. The trees breathe in the carbon dioxide. They give off the oxygen. If you think of the sign of infinity, which looks like a figure 8 laying on its side, I use that, I kind of use that as a visualization of this exchange. The breath leaves me and goes out to the tree, and it turns and it comes back, it comes to me, and then I in turn give it back. See? Every minute that we are alive, from the moment we take our first breath from the atmosphere until the moment we give our last breath back to it, we are involved in this exchange. We are involved in this harmony. We are involved in this beautiful flow of life. But we never think about it, see. We never stop and think about it. The people who lived long ago, when people lived closer to the land, even in some of our experience, Lori and I grew up in a beach community. Jeannie and John said they're down at Ricefield Beach. We grew up in an area like that up in New York City. And as kids growing up, we were not so attuned to the clock as we were to the tides. We knew where the tide was. We knew whether it was coming in or whether it was going out. We knew the appropriate activities that we could engage in at high tide. We knew the appropriate activities that we could engage in at low tide. At low tide, we would go out in the mud flats and dig clams and fiddler crabs and worms and things like that for our bait. At high tide, we would go fishing. You know, when the moon was full, we would put a lantern, a big Coleman lantern, on the front of the boat and pole out over the mud flats and catch crabs and eels and things like that. We were in the rhythm, we were in the harmony, we were in the cycle of life, you see. And the people who live closer to the land were aware of these things, were aware of their interaction with it, were aware of being a part of those cycles. I was watching a series of videos that were put on by a Native American tribe out in the Seattle area. They're kind of giving the history of the area from the point of view of the Native Americans. And it was very interesting to me that they were talking about the concept of land ownership and the concept of farming, you know. Now the Europeans came and they had a concept of farming was that, well, you get 40 acres and you get a couple of plow animals and you put up fences and you have livestock and you do all these things. But the original people, their concept was totally different, you see. The land was there, the animals were there. There was no need to own. There was no need to fence in. Everything was there. If a fire came, and at times they would set fires in order to start the cycle, parts of the forest would burn down. But then the renewal took place. And they knew that if there had been a fire, after 1 year, there would be a certain kind of plant growing there. After 2 years, there would be a different, and so on. And they knew the medicinal value, and they knew the food value of these different plants. And they were able to just coexist with nature in harmony and go out into the forest and harvest what was appropriate for life. And when the Europeans came and we settled, we didn't have that same concept, don't have that same concept. I read something once about the circle of life. And the best I can remember it, excuse me, it's allegedly something spoken by a Native American chief. And it goes to the effect that life is a circle. The sun is a circle. The moon is a circle. Excuse me, I'm getting some tea. The horizon is a circle. You know, if you've ever been out on a boat out at sea and you look around, You go 360 degrees around the horizon, it makes a circle around you. To build a fire in a circle. The bottom of the teepee makes a circle. The teepees are in a camp are pitched in a circle around the fire. See, everything that they had, everything that they were working with there was to remind them that life is a circle and they were part of that life. That's the best I can remember, and I can't tell you exactly where I read that. But I want you to get that idea that life is a circle, and there are people who were in tune with and in harmony with the flow of the way that life worked. And then man comes along, modern man, and if you look at everything we build, it's got sharp angles to it. You know, our buildings are square. Everything that we build is almost a juxtaposition with the way nature is, with the circle, with the roundness of life. Just a little observation, but it's as if we as human beings are struggling against the harmony of life because we believe that that is appropriate. So what Dr. Bales has been telling us, what we touched briefly last week on Carlton Whitehead, what Ralph Waldo Trine is telling us is that there already is this harmony. There already is this perfection. There already is this wisdom that knows what to do. We lived in Denver for a few years, and there was a big fire up at Yellowstone, and people were just, you know, outraged that the government was letting the fire burn. And of course, the policy of the Park Service was, this is a natural event, and these occur, these are necessary for the renewal of the forest, and there's no need to go in there and try to put them out. After a while, due to social pressure and the fact that the fire was getting closer and closer to the border of the park, they did in fact go put it out. But one of the local TV stations did a unique series. They went back to Yellowstone every quarter. And every 90 days after the fire, they brought their cameras up to the scorched earth and showed how nature was renewing itself. They have a little animal, it's more like a chipmunk than a squirrel. I can't remember the exact name of it, but if you've ever been in the mountains, you've seen him. And these little animals, like squirrels, bury the seed in the ground. And after the fire, after the ground was covered with ash for several inches, they somehow still knew where to go dig to find seed. And as they were digging down to find seed, they were pulling seed up out of the earth and scattering seed on top of the ash. And this brought a new growth. This brought new vegetation. As I say, the Native Americans in Seattle knew that after so many years after a fire, different types of plants would grow because there was an intelligence at work. See, nature was at work. So there is this intelligence, there is this power, there is this presence, there is this wisdom. And what our spiritual growth consists of is making our connection with that in our consciousness, Now, as life has evolved, as life evolved, if you look at the purpose of evolution just from a biological standpoint, it's to survive, right? The number one purpose is to survive. And everything that contributes to that survival, it's carried on. And anything that takes away from that, it eventually gets weeded out of the gene pool. Right? The people who thought that petting saber-toothed tigers was a good thing to do, they're not with us anymore. Now, along with that, just because we survive, we may carry with us a lot of ideas that don't really do anything for our survival, but they don't hurt our chances for survival. So there's a lot of baggage that gets carried along in our race consciousness, in our collective consciousness, that is not necessarily true. But one of the things that I see that happened, and this is me, you need to go check it out for yourself, is that in order to improve our chances for survival, the way that our attentiveness evolved is that things that we are familiar with, things that become routine, things that are not harmful to us, we kind of put them down into, we program them into the subconscious, if you want to think about it. So we don't have to pay attention to them. They get done, but they don't require our conscious attention. The example I use all the time with that is when you were learning how to drive, or learning any skill, but learning how to drive particularly. I learned how to drive in New York City. The first time that I got behind the wheel was on, you know, an 8-lane boulevard in New York City with cab drivers zipping everywhere. When you're learning how to drive, your attention is scattered everywhere. How hard am I pressing on the gas? Where is the brake? Is my blinker on? Is my blinker not on? How far do I have to turn the wheel? You know, am I going fast enough? Am I going too slow? All these kind of things are constantly going through mine. Am I checking my mirrors? What does the temperature gauge say? And we are consciously aware that we are checking all of these things. But after we become practiced in driving, we are no longer consciously aware, but we are still checking these things. So we're no longer saying, okay, side mirror, instrument panel, rear view mirror, instrument panel, side mirror. We're not deliberately forcing ourselves to do these things, but yet they are still occurring. They are still occurring. We are still doing those things. If there's a noise in the house at night, even though you're deeply asleep, even though you're unconscious or maybe even dreaming, you will hear the noise and you will react and respond to it. Part of you, below your level of consciousness, was aware. So what we have done is we have kind of developed a sense of attentiveness that is focused on problems, right? So the things that are good that are going on, and they're in the background, and we don't have to pay attention to them. We have to keep our attention focused in case something goes wrong, okay? In case a wild animal attacks us. All of these different things. So what that means is that our outlook towards life, as we have gone through evolution, is to pay attention to the things that are going wrong. A very important point. We naturally pay attention to the things that are going wrong and ignore the things that are going right, because the things that are going right don't require our attention. But from a spiritual point of view, if we wish to reconnect to the harmony, to the perfection, to the kindness, to the love, to the goodness, to the joy, to the celebration of life that we have been created to partake in, we have to consciously bring ourselves to the awareness of the good. Gratitude. Gratitude. Gratitude is a spiritual practice that deliberately causes us to bring our attention to that which is good. That's the point in a nutshell. The goodness is here. The perfection is here. The healing is here. We must connect with it. But evolution has taught us to ignore that and look for the things that could be going wrong. This is why on the news, you know, how many times people have tried to have a good news channel? We're going to have a station that's just going to talk about good news, and commercially it never succeeds. It needs a sponsor. I think the most successful one I knew of was the Wisdom Channel, was a cable channel, and there was somebody who was very wealthy who was a sponsor for that. But people are not attuned to look for the good things. Yet, every night, the last story that they have on the news, on every channel that you look at for the nightly news, is a feel-good story. So they spend 30 minutes telling us all the terrible things that are going wrong, because that is what our consciousness is attuned to pay attention to. and they want to hold our attention, so we watch the commercials. That's simple. But you and I, as spiritual beings now, we want to take that dominion over our attention, and we want to bring it to the good. Dr. Rocco Errico tells us that the Aramaic word for prayer means an attunement. And he wrote a little booklet about the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, and he called it Setting a Trap for God. He said there's 8 attunements in there, and what we are trying to do is to attune our consciousness to these 8 beliefs, these 8 points, so that we can capture more of God, right? Capture more of God. So we need to define gratitude just a little bit as we're talking about it, and then we want to consider how are we going to make it a practice. What I'm suggesting is that for this month of Thanksgiving, this November, I am inviting each and every one to make gratitude your spiritual practice for the month. Many people keep gratitude journals. If you don't, you might want to consider getting some sort of a notebook or a journal book. You can buy them at the stationery stores. And just every day before you go to bed, write down 3 things that you experienced that day that you are grateful for. Think about those as you go to sleep instead of thinking about the problems of the world. But first we have to figure out what gratitude is. Excuse me. So in our culture we have been taught that gratitude is a reaction. Gratitude is a reaction to something that somebody does for us, particularly when we're children. And you know, grandma gives you a couple bucks and your parents say, "Now what do you say?" And you say, "Thank you." You know, when your parents took you trick-or-treating as a kid, you go to the door and say trick or treat. So we put candy in your bag and your parents would say, "What do you say?" And you would say, "Thank you." And that's our idea of gratitude. It's almost like a social obligation that we say this, but what is it that we are experiencing? What is it that we are experiencing? So this idea of gratitude that I'm talking about is not that. It is not to stop and say, thank you. It is not to stop and say, well, you gave me this. Thank you for this. That in itself is good. That in itself is okay. But I'm talking about something much deeper than that. I am talking about gratitude as celebration. Gratitude as an experience of joy. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about gratitude. Dr. Holmes tells us that the mystic is the one who deeply realizes the presence and the activity of God. That's what we're talking about. That's what gratitude is about. See, if we feel like strangers in a strange land, if we have grown up in religions that taught us not to trust our own nature, not to trust our own bodies, not to trust the world, to be afraid of everything. There's so much fear in our world. Just look around you. How much? Ask yourself, what would your Facebook feed look like if fear was gone? There'd be hardly anything in there. But can we find the good? Can we teach ourselves to catch God being God, to catch God being good, and to celebrate that, to say yes, to say yes, to say yes. This is why in meditation we're taught to observe breath, because it occurs all the time, and it is a miracle every moment, and yet we seldom pay attention to the flow, to the rhythm, to the harmony of life. So gratitude then, as I am discussing it today or defining it today, gratitude is celebration. Rejoice, okay? Appreciate. Maybe appreciation is a is a word that will resonate better. Can you appreciate that? Wow. Wow. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? Now, a couple things about gratitude that we want to briefly touch on, and this comes from Dr. Whitehead. And one thing that we are taught is that sometimes gratitude is a way of teaching us to just settle for what you have, You should be thankful for what you have because it could be worse. Lori and I were watching TV the other night, and Jimmy Kimmel was interviewing actor David Duchovny. And his mother was from Scotland, and Jimmy Kimmel says, "What was it like growing up in New York with a mother who was Scottish?" And he says, "Well, there's one thing he had to learn about growing up with a Scottish mother." Now, this was his experience as he was relating it. And he said, "Is you learn not to complain." Excuse me, I'll get another drink. He said whenever he started to complain about something, his mother would say something to him in Gaelic, and he repeated it, and then he translated it. And she said, "Well, you probably like that better than you like getting hit with a stone behind your ear." And he said the interpretation he took was, unless somebody's beating you in the head with a brick, be happy with what you have. Stop complaining. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about settling for what you have. Yes, we should be thankful. We should be appreciative. We should rejoice in everything we have. But we do not want to deny the infinite possibilities of life, you see. We're not talking about using gratitude as a way of settling. We are talking of gratitude as a celebration of life. A celebration of life. When a new baby is born in the family, that is a celebration of life, you see. That is a celebration. Everybody wants to hold that little one. Everyone wants to get that little one to smile. Everyone looks at this little baby and says, "Oh my God, it's a miracle. It's a miracle." And it is, you see. But at that moment, we're celebrating it. But what happens later on is we forget that miracle. It becomes routine to us. We don't marvel in it every minute of every day. And what I'm talking about in the practice of gratitude is marveling in the miracle of life every minute of every day. The other misconception we have about gratitude is that God needs our thanks. God needs our praise. God needs our worship. God is a jealous God, and if we don't worship God and celebrate God and give thanks to God, well, God's not going to give anything else to us. And that to me is just, that's kind of fear. That's fear-based. God doesn't need anything from us. God already is everything there is. God already has everything there is to have. But it created us to experience life anew as us, you see. So the gift that we can give to the divine is to appreciate creation, to appreciate life. The other misconception about gratitude is that it's causative. Now, it's true that gratitude is a causative energy. That what we praise, what we celebrate, what we give thanks for, however we put it, more of that shows up in our lives. But what happens is people then start to think of it as a transaction. I have been to prosperity workshops with some very famous teachers in that topic. And the way that I came away from what they were saying was, well, if you give them your 10%, you see, then God's going to bless you tenfold. And that's a transaction. That's not a celebration. That's an investment, you see. If I go and put $1,000 in a hedge fund and I expect a $10,000 return, that's not gratitude, right? That's an investment. That's a celebration. Excuse me again. So one minister I talked to said that I think it was out in Monterey. They were in a church in Monterey, and there was somebody who, when they were broke, would come into the church and would empty their pockets into the little, like a poor box, little offering box that was there. And what they were doing was they were priming the pump. You see, they believed that if they gave what they had, which was only a little bit of change, but they believed that they gave that, they would get more back in return. And they did. This was their belief. But I'm not talking about gratitude as a transaction. I'm not talking about gratitude as, well, I need to prime the pump, so I'm going to go be grateful today. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about gratitude as a celebration of life. I'm talking about becoming the observer, the aware, the attentive observer to all of the good that is taking place right here and right now in our lives, and identifying with it. Instead of saying, well, there's good out there, there's good happening there, there's good happening there, to recognize that you and I are an integral and an important part of life celebrating itself. I used to say, the universe is having a party and you're the location. Life is celebrating itself. The divine is celebrating its own creation. It's so wonderful when we work with children, and I know some of the folks listening in have been teachers, working with the small children, and to see the wonder in their eyes, the awe when they discover things that you and I as an adult go by and never look twice at. We must be as little children. We must celebrate the goodness. So think of this. Think of a journal, and think of yourself during the day paying attention to what good have I just celebrated? What good just passed before my eyes? Okay? Set your little Fitbit watch or whatever you have to beep every 15 minutes or so, if you have a watch that'll do that. And when it beeps, stop and ask yourself, what good just transpired here? Where is the rhythm? Where is the balance? Where is the harmony of life? We've tuned that out. We've become so expecting of a scientist in a lab someplace to develop a new chemical that's going to cure some kind of disease that we forget. We forget the miracle of nature. Some of the early people saw that when animals were injured, they ate the bark of a certain tree. So the people ate the bark of a certain tree and found out it made the pain go away. Aspirin comes from willow bark. The miracle is already there. See? The miracle is already here. We are part of that miracle. So I invite you, as you go through the rest of this week and the rest of this month, get your journal and make yourself a conscious observer of the good of life. We have life. That is something to be celebratory of. We can move. We can eat. We can enjoy our food. We have the sunshine. We have the nighttime. We have each other. We have each other to remind us of the goodness of God. Can you look into the eyes of your beloved and see how good God is? Can you look into the eyes of your pet as you stroke it, pet it, and see how good God is? Can you think of a newborn baby and recognize just how precious life is? Can you give thanks for yourself? Can you be grateful for yourself? Can you celebrate yourself? Can you look into the mirror and see what a miracle you are? What God has done. How perfect your body is. How perfect your consciousness is. What a beautiful gift it is to allow you to awaken to the fact that you can observe your thoughts. That you can choose whether to give your attention to the negative or to the positive. Gratitude is a spiritual discipline by which we appreciate all the goodness that is already here. Keep your mind stayed on thee, kind of biblical. Right? I keep my mind stayed on thee. Read the 23rd Psalm. The Lord shepherds me, I lack nothing. This is the day the Lord has made. Rejoice and be glad in it. Celebrate life every minute of every day, but not as just an observer, as an integral part. Life is celebrating itself as you. Life itself is grateful for you. The gift that we give to the world is to celebrate the magnificence of creation. Not because we want to use it to create something new in our life, even though it will, but that's not our intention. I only want thee. I only want thee. Take time to enjoy. Take time to be in love. Take time to feel the goodness and the presence in the midst of the craziness, in the midst of the chaos, right? Like in the lion den, in the furnace, in the midst of all of that. Can we find a way to find the goodness? You know, I appreciate the work of Viktor Frankl. He was able to find something to be happy about in Auschwitz. Look for the good. Find the good. Recognize that you are the good. Celebrate life every minute, every second, every day. Write it down in your journal. And so it is. So today, I found a closing treatment in Dr. Carlton Whitehead's book, Creative Meditation. I'm holding it up for the folks on YouTube. I don't think it's in print anymore, but you can get used copies of it out on the web. This is a treatment he put in. He called it appreciation. Appreciation expands my abundant good. The miraculous action of mind is active in me and through me. Appreciation of its unique creation, which I am, expands my awareness and consequently my cooperation with it at all levels. I marvel at the creative intelligence that designed and built my body and that at this moment is forming new cells in every nerve, organ, and muscle of this incredible vehicle I use. My rejoicing in this continual renewal action of mind sweeps from my consciousness all attitudes that could in any way interfere. I stand in awe as mind molds outer garments for my thoughts and brings them forth as a new experience. Wonder of wonders. My ideas take form through the same marvelous process that formed the sun, the stars, and my body. Aware of the beauty and the simplicity of this truth, I entertain only life-giving thoughts. I think in terms of wholeness, harmony, productiveness, and joy. The action of mind moves me into a richer, fuller, more abundant life. I glory in my growing appreciation of God, acting in and through me. Life's a celebration. Life is celebrating as you. Be aware of it. Bring your attention to it. We want to thank you for your love and support.